As they broke their bindings, the pumpkins began to move towards us with purpose. What their purpose might be, I wasn't sure, but I really didn't want to find out. Gourds or not, their teeth suddenly looked very real, the hate-filled eyes very purposeful, and I wondered how much magic the lady had poured into them. Maybe this was the sort of thing that Randy had been worried about when she started taking power from Stragview. Maybe this was just an expression of her frustration and anger. Either way, it was about to become a problem. None of these pumpkins leave the area. Is that understood? I asked the other Brandylow. They grunted, gripping their weapons as the hopping, bobbing terrors came in on us. To us, this was a standoff, a real skirmish, but I imagine to anyone else, looking on, it would have seemed pretty ridiculous. My cudgel came whistling down on the lead pumpkin, and it broke open like a ripe sack of garbage as the seeds and pulp flew. There were about 40 of them, all teeth and rind and anger, and despite their fearsome visage, they were not terribly formidable. For one, they couldn't do much beyond hopping at us. They had no arms and legs, so they were forced into a sort of waddling gait that pitched between a constipated shuffle and a half-hearted hop. This made them pretty easy pickings, but they did have numbers on their side, and my earlier observation about the teeth had been correct. Through some sort of magic, the usually squishy mouths were now painful and quite formidable. I'd squashed 2 of them before the first one bit me, and I had to swallow a yelp as it threatened to crunch my ankle. The others weren't faring much better. The pumpkins came up to their knees, and you would have said that the 4 of us would have been more than enough, but you'd be wrong. They bumped over us, knocking against our knees and ankles, and a couple of the Brandylow went down. The pumpkins were thankfully not heavy enough to crush them, but as I swung my cudgel and tried to keep my feet, I wondered what would happen if more than a few of them decided to jump on one of my friends. "Help him!" I shouted at Charles, the one with the hoe, and he moved over to Stanley, the other Brandylow with a hoe, and swatted them away as he helped him back to his feet. "Back to back," I called out, the 4 of us getting close so we could hopefully not be knocked back down. They ringed us in, snapping jaws and evil eyes, but that honestly made them easier to smack down. They slammed into our ankles, nipping and biting, and we turned them to pulp just as fast. We broke them apart, scattered their innards, and after a few minutes, their numbers didn't seem so limitless. We turned them to compost, and even in the late afternoon, I found myself sweating. We stood there for what felt like hours, swatting and smashing and pulping gourds. I stifled a smile, thinking to myself that the next thing they would have would be a pie baking contest on their hands. All this spent pumpkin, I laughed again, and not a single girl in Ugg boots with a cappuccino in sight. I laughed, and the other Brandylow shot sidelong looks at me. Jesus, this was a mess. I was breathing heavily by the time they stopped slamming against us, and I didn't even get a chance to catch my breath. "What is this?" Her voice cut across us like a scythe, and the 4 of us turned to see the lady returning with Anne. She was no less beautiful than she ever was, but now there was a cold fury about her, and I hadn't seen it since the battle last year. That, however, had been an anger tempered by purpose. This was more akin to a teenager who had been told they couldn't go out after curfew. She was furious, her face pulsing with rage, and I had never felt closer to death than I did at that moment. And that was saying something, since I had already nearly died here once. "How dare you?" she growled, and Anne stepped away from her, eyes filling with tears. "You know how much work I have, how much work there is to do, and yet you unmake everything I have worked so hard on. You set me back. My lady, I do not interrupt me," she whispered, her anger building as her voice lowered. I am your maker, your lady, and you dare to... Then act like it, I shouted, finding myself just as done as she was. We had to destroy these things because they presented a danger to the garden. We had to clean up your mess because you've become so blinded by your desires that you're becoming blind to what's going on. She backed away, her anger shifting into fear so quickly that it scared me a little. You are a force of nature, my lady, and the thought of you being in anything other than absolute control of yourself is terrifying. She began to cry, and I reached out, feeling her shake as I took her hand. My lady, you aren't in control of yourself. Something is happening to you, and I can see it working on the rest of us. Your strength is our strength, and the strength we feel in you is strange. You've become strange to us, and it makes us feel like strangers to ourselves. She shook as I held her hand, and it moved her body strangely. She appeared to jump in place like the static on a TV screen, her form wavering in my hands. It hurt my eyes to watch her, but I couldn't turn away. She was my mother, my love, my friend, and my death, all in one package. She could call my life back at any moment, and she knew it. She chose not to, however, because in many ways, we were all she had of a place that she would never see again. I'm sorry, she breathed, crying. I don't know what's happening to me. This is different. It's not the same as it normally is. Something is strange, new, she faltered as she tried to find the words. Dark, she finally landed on, shuddering as she put a word to it. We'll figure this out, I promised her. It'll be okay. For now, though, we need to... Some of them got away, came a shaky voice over my shoulder. I turned and found Charles looking at me, his face a mask of confused dread. Who? The pumpkins. A couple of them got away. I turned to look at him, but I didn't drop her hand. They were all still here, and too, and I felt a little anger bubble up in me. Why hadn't they gone after them? Why had they just stood there and watched me? Why couldn't they do anything right? Why did they... I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Her energy was really affecting us. We need to find them, I said, turning back as I let her go. How many were there? 4, Charles said. 5, Stanley said. I only saw 3, admitted Crystal. Okay, split up and get them. Charles, you and Crystal go search the south. Stanley, you and I will go north. Keep them away from the auditor and let the others know to keep an eye peeled. Go. And what should I do? Came a small voice. I turned back to see the lady looking at me. Her tear-streaked face as beautiful as it was horrible. You and Anne do something about all this. Don't start growing more until Kayla's gone. I'll go get the ones that fled. If they come back, take care of them. With that, we all left in a hurry, setting out to find the lost gourds and hopefully stop them before they could affect the garden further. Stanley and I split up at the lily pond, deciding we could cover more ground that way. I was coming around the edge of the spooky forest when I saw it, the little pumpkin shuffling along as it glowered and hopped near the entrance. I crept up on it, hoping it was the last one. It hadn't seen me yet, and if I was careful, I could get in close before it... The trees are transplants from the largest natural cemetery in North America. The inventor actually plants human remains beneath them, and the bodies nourish the trees and make them grow to extraordinary heights. Fascinating, I heard Cal drone. And did they grow like this, or did the lady make the faces on them? Gentle manipulation, Tobias assured him. Crap, I'd expected them to be further along by now. I needed to get this thing before they saw it. This is really something, Cale said, sounding impressed. I didn't know humans had come quite this far. The connection between humanity and the trees would be astronomical. Also, since it doubles as a cemetery, the trees cannot be cut, and the land cannot be developed. The pumpkin looked up, hearing them approach, and I made my move. A quick lunge, a hard swing, and the wicked little thing fell in pieces by the path. I pushed the remains into the woods as they came up the trail, and nodded at them as they approached. "Ah, there you are," Tobias said. "We thought we had lost you." I fell in behind them, and when Randy looked back, raising an eyebrow, I shot him a thumbs up. He looked relieved. The rest of the audit went fine, and when I saw Charles and Crystal, they flashed a thumbs up as well, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The lady, to my surprise, met us at the gate and looked much calmer than she had earlier. She accepted Cale's report, listening to what he was saying, and assured him that these plants were only for seasonal use inside the park. Cale was happy to assure her that he had found no problems here within and would be telling Titania as much. The Queen had heard the most outlandish claims. I told the Queen I put very little credence into such stories, but she insisted that He staggered a little as something bumped him, and I looked down in horror as I saw one of the grumpy-looking gourds ramming against his leg. Cale looked down, raising an eyebrow, and I thought for sure we were cooked. Randy glanced at me, asking too much to convey in a single glance. But when Cale bent down to scratch the ugly thing along the stem, like it was no more than a house cat, I blew out in relief. "Where have you been hiding these? I haven't seen gourdlings in a long time. They're so cute when they're this age, though very temperamental." The pumpkin creature seemed to look back at me, almost smugly, before returning to the rest of the park. "Huh, well shit, the more you know. So, I will be happy to inform the Queen that the claims against you are unfounded. I see no breach of natural law here, as long as you do not mean to introduce any of these trees or creatures into the wild to spread. So long as they are kept here, then that is entirely fine. I don't believe many of them could exist outside the place anyway." "Wait, was that the reason you came?" Randy asked. "I'm really not supposed to say, it being a matter for the Fae Court, but..." Cale thought about it for a moment, seeming to weigh his options, before leaning down to half whisper. "Queen Titania had been told by a reputable court member that you intended to introduce these plants into the nearby Appalachian countryside. Such a thing would upset the natural order of not just the earth, but also the world of the creatures who live in the area. Many of them have very particular ecosystems and diets, and if any new fauna were introduced, it would jeopardize that. It could also be highly detrimental to the creatures who serve both Queen Titania and Queen Mab." He took his leave then, as did the lady, the gourdling hot on her heels. Randy, Tobias, and I shared a look. Message received. Someone had been spreading lies. "You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.